Uh, Again, I want to welcome everyone wherever you are across the country joining us. This meeting is a pre-conference gathering ahead of our the Together Ensemble Conference, which starts tomorrow. And the background to this meeting is that Climate Caucus, and I'll take 2 minutes to just explain and set this up before handing it off to Will and Megan. But Climate Caucus is a national network of mayors and councillors from across the country that are focused on climate action. Many of us are new councillors and mayors who have made climate change our top priority. We ran, some of us, on an explicit climate change platform, and others are more experienced mayors and councillors who have who see that climate is a key factor in the safety and the security of our communities. So this meeting here really is about action, although it's sort of more the precursor to action. And by that I mean that we have struggled a little bit with the various frameworks for thinking about change. And as the communications team for Climate Caucus, Will and Meg and I have talked quite a bit for more than a year with Robert Kiley in Kingston about how do we effectively communicate what we're trying to achieve as a Climate Caucus, what we're hoping to accomplish in each of our municipalities or local governments, and then what's that going to mean nationally for driving action on climate across Canada. And so, you know, we've talked variously about developing a manifesto and so on, but we really don't want to reinvent the wheel. And as we've grown as a network and built partnerships and relationships, it's been very clear to us that one thing that we're lacking as a country is sort of a consistent national framework, or at the very least, maybe not a single framework, but at least a very clear and easy to communicate way of translating between these frameworks. And so that's one of the reasons why we're on this call today. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Will Cole-Hamilton. Will is a counselor in Courtenay, BC, and also a regional director, and also much more articulate than me. So Will, I'm going to hand it to you.
All right, thanks. Good morning, everyone. And I just want to acknowledge that I happen to be currently out in the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. And as Rick said, we've been talking for a while about the ways that we talk about the work that we're doing. And there are many different frameworks out there, the SDGs, the Green New Deal, donut economics, lots of other models available. And sometimes at times, the differing messages and frameworks we use kind of diminish or dilute the impact on the public and policymakers. So what we're hoping is to see if we can, through a dialogue like this and more come, to get on some work towards the first green shoots of a synthesis, of a way of speaking which expresses the action that all of us want to take, but without diminishing the approach. And while that's a challenging thing to be doing as local government leaders who are trying to change the world, we get up each day trying to do more improbable things quite frequently. So hopefully we can be successful today in finding some common ground frameworks we're using to talk about the climate and ecological inequity crisis that faces us. And really, it's with great pleasure I'd like to introduce the moderator for today, Megan Curran. She's a first-term councillor in the District of North Vancouver. She's one of the most uncompromising advocates I've met on climate, ecological inequity crisis, and she's a core member of Climate Caucus in every way. In some ways, it's hard to believe that I've only known Megan a year. We're both first-term councillors, and it seems like we've done so much in the time that's passed since meeting last May. She's a good friend and a cherished colleague, so please welcome our moderator, Megan Curran.
Thanks, Will. That was unexpected. I appreciate that. So it's so nice to see everyone here. I would like to first acknowledge that I am on the land of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. And that's really important to me as we talk about climate action, to recognize that a lot of what we inevitably end up talking about is what people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years before colonization. So I am pleased and very grateful for all of our speakers. And I want to just quickly introduce the people who will be sharing their frameworks for change perspectives with us, just brief intros. And then we're going to get right into the speakers. So we have Lisa Helps. Where are you, Lisa? There you are. Mayor of Victoria. And Lisa is a second term mayor there, was on council for one term, I think, before getting elected as mayor, and has been working with the, among other things, but the Sustainable Development Goals framework at a city level. So we're really excited for you to share your perspective on how that's been received in your community, challenges, opportunities, and leading up again to this Together conference, which is the Canadian Sustainable Development Network's 3-day conference that starts tomorrow, that everyone's welcome to come to. So the next speaker, I'm not sure exactly what order. We have a few last minute folks that might be coming in, so I'm still trying to figure that out. Hi, Katie. So Katie Ray Purport is from 350.org, and I'm so excited for you to join us today to talk about the Green New Deal and the Just Recovery. So the Just Recovery was put together with lots of different volunteers, organizations, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see that response to COVID. We haven't really talked about COVID-19 specifically, but I think it'll invariably come up as we look to going forward and not going backwards. So thank you for joining us, Katie. You're in, well, maybe you'll introduce where you are when we come to you, because I'm not sure where everyone is today. So Dr. Jenny Moore, I saw you somewhere. So excited to, let's see, I have to go scroll to my next page. It's nice to like see people when you're talking to them. Hi.
I'm here.
So Jenny is the director at the Institute for Sustainability in BC at the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And when we first chatted, it was so awesome to connect. I saw you speak at EcoCities last year, which is where I met Ted Sheldon, another person that's on this call. Hi, Ted. And it was so great to hear your experiences, starting with Metro Vancouver, working in air quality, I believe in the 90s, and really one of the leaders in climate action at the local level in this area. So also, in addition to working on EcoCity, you're developing a tool for consumption-based emissions, which we're really looking forward to hearing about. I think you've also worked with One Planet with Cora, who we're going to next. So I haven't done any of you justice, but we're going to move on in the interest of time, and feel free to chime in and tell us a little bit more about yourselves when we get to you. Cora, you are on this page, I think. Just scroll back and forth. So Cora is a project director, manager, and facilitator for all levels of government, business, and nonprofits. And I was really excited to learn about the work that One Planet Saanich has been doing. And Cora has been the lead on, or I guess the principal on that project. So we're really excited to learn a little bit more about One Earth and One Planet. And so I think you two are sort of tagging on that agenda item. And I'm not sure, we had a couple last minute. I just want to see if anyone was able to make it. Don't want to miss anyone. It looks like no. We were hoping to anyway, I was hoping to have a representative from Indigenous Climate Action it's an amazing organization. If you don't all know about it, ICA, and I definitely encourage everyone to go and visit their website and learn about more of the work that they're doing. So I think we will go ahead and begin with, if I can find my agenda. You're up, Mayor. Let's see. Oh, I guess Katie, you're up first. You're going to talk about the Green New Deal and 350.org's work with the Just Recovery as well. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me. And I'm very excited to be here. I see some faces that I recognize, but a lot that I don't. So this is great. So I'm going to be sharing some slides with you, which I'm going to try to line up here right now. Do I have screen share abilities? I think I'll need to be made co-host.
Katie, you're co-host now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. I made some colorful slides up for you all. So yes, I work with 350.org. I'm based in Canada. I usually live in Ottawa, but since the COVID-19 hit, I relocated to live with my mother in the Ottawa Valley, and it's the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So I'm not sure how familiar folks are here with 350.org, but we're a global organization. We work all around the world, and basically our mandate is to support grassroots community-led efforts to resist the expansion of the fossil fuel industry and to fight for the kind of solutions that we need to tackle the climate crisis. So my role here in Canada is really to be supporting that grassroots effort. I'm a national organizer, and I've been doing this work with 350 for about 4.5 years now. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Green New Deal, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and then talk about the Just Recovery, which has emerged as an idea out of the response to COVID-19. And I'm curious, just before we get rolling, who here has heard about the Green New Deal? Start in the chat. I'm sure most people have. So I'm going to give a little bit of a quick and dirty of what the Green New Deal is. Basically, the Green New Deal has been an idea that's been around for quite a long time, and it's a global idea. South Korea, in the UK, there's like lots of different countries and regions that have been exploring this idea, but I think in North America, it really became popular when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brought forward a resolution to the Senate to push for a Green New Deal. And this was really on the heels of a social movement push for a kind of climate response that met the scale, the urgency of the crisis that was in front of us. A lot of politicians will look at like silver bullet, whether it's like a carbon tax or something like that. Social movements were really calling for a kind of ambitious sweeping plan that the IPCC report has been telling us that we need. So it really caught the attention of a lot of people when AOC was putting this out into the world. And I know for myself and Tika on this call, who we work together in different areas, is that it was really captivating for people here in Canada to see, wow, like this is the kind of package that we're looking for when we're talking about like those far-reaching, rapid responses to climate change that we need. So as an organizer too, I was definitely seeing a lot of young people who I organize with, reaching out to say, hey, have you heard about this? Like, let's do something like that here in Canada. So what ended up happening was a huge group of organizations came together around, figuring out what this could look like here in Canada. And I'm sure many of your organizations are actually part of the Green New Deal, a Pact for a Green New Deal coalition. But basically what we came up with is we didn't want to have a laundry list of what the policies were in a Green New Deal, but rather we wanted to have pillars that could help in a lot of different organizations behind this banner that we're all in front of to say that it needs to be an ambitious policy platform that cuts sectors and listens to the science, respects Indigenous rights, creates millions of good jobs, and enshrines dignity and justice for all. So, if the policy that you are working on ticks all of those boxes, then it's the kind of policy we need for the sweeping Green New Deal. So we've definitely hit a nerve. There were 200 plus Green New Deal town halls that happened across the country last year. There was momentous youth-led organizing, which inspired dozens of election hopefuls to run on a platform for a Green New Deal for Canada in the lead up to the federal election. There were over 1 million people in the streets during the global climate strikes, just in Canada alone. So there was so much energy behind climate action, especially last year, with the urgency that the IPCC 1.5 degree report put out, but also, of course, we know like all of the impacts that people are seeing in their communities. And what was really cool is that after the election, we started to actually see some of that consolidation of power happening, where the people who had said, yes, I'm going to champion a Green New Deal and work across party lines to make it happen, that was actually starting to roll out in the House of Commons. So the motion M1 was the first piece of Green New Deal type, it was a resolution, it wasn't legislation, but it was the first thing to be moved forward in the House of Commons in the first sitting of the House after the election, which was, I think, really a testament to what happens when social movements feel really inspired behind an idea and are engaging in the political sphere to push politicians to pick up these things that social movements are championing, and then holding them accountable to it afterwards. And then, of course, COVID-19 surfaced, and I think a lot of us would agree that it really it put a spotlight on a lot of the existing really deep problems in our economic and political spheres. It's a crisis that's not just a health crisis. We know that it's an economic crisis, and this convergence of the climate crisis and all of the social inequity that has been built up over decades. We're seeing record levels of unemployment right now, the kind of unemployment we haven't seen since World War II. And we also have seen, all of the people that are really holding our economy up and making sure that we continue functioning and keeping people safe and fed are in some of the most precarious work positions in the country. So it really put a spotlight on where our priorities have moved and how our economic system has really taken advantage of people. And so I think what started to click, it took a few weeks for me, certainly, after the crisis really hit, was to say, like, a lot of the things we had been calling for in a Green New Deal are the things that could have set us up to be more prepared for this crisis, and would have, of course, helped us to move us on a path towards climate justice. But things like massive investments in the care economy, in that low carbon work in the care economy, would have been vital to helping us be able to better respond to COVID-19. We also know that some of the communities most at risk and hardest hit by this crisis are, people who have been historically marginalized, like I said before. So it's really shed a spotlight on the, conditions in long-term care facilities, what migrant workers face and the kind of precarity that they're facing. If you've heard about the Cargill meat processing facilities, like, it's absolutely horrendous. And then also, about Indigenous communities, that many of which don't even have running water or clean drinking water. And, the first thing they say is just wash your hands a lot. Well, what do you do when you don't actually have running water? what do you do if your community doesn't actually have access to broadband internet to actually understand the scope and scale of the crisis in the first place? So these were all things that, are coming to light. And then, of course, there's just the fact that we're continuing to see the impacts of climate change. We're heading towards an accelerated wildfire season. And I don't have to tell you, but all of the ways that air quality will compound COVID-19, and the fact that, a lot of right-wing politicians and industry want to scale back on monitoring and safeguards for the environment. So all this is to say, the status quo is not something we can go back to. It was devastating for communities and for our climate. And we knew that before the crisis hit, but the crisis just made it, the COVID-19 crisis just made it even more apparent. But what's really interesting is that people in Canada don't actually expect us to return to the way it was before, which means we have a huge opportunity. People are priming themselves for a huge shift. And that means they are not thinking we're going to return to the status quo, and that actually most people think that we're going to shift towards a society that focuses more on health and our social security and our well-being, which bodes really well for the kind of work that we do, which is trying to push for more climate-focused and justice-oriented policy. So moving towards a just recovery, which is sort of the thing that we're really focusing on now, which aligns well with the Green New Deal, there are literally hundreds of organizations globally and lots of organizations here in Canada who are lining up behind this idea of a just recovery out of the COVID-19 crisis that puts us on a path towards a Green New Deal. So if you want to look at the signatories, I've put them in the background here, but you can go to 350.org/justrecovery. You can look at the principles in their original form and check out some of the work that's happening around that, and all of the organizations saying we're not going to go back. And Tika and myself and a bunch of different people from different organizations in Canada took those just recovery principles and adapted them to fit what we feel is really important here in Canada. And so the principles that this, alliance or emerging coalition put together is that for a just recovery to happen here in Canada, it needs to put people's health and well-being first with no exceptions. It needs to strengthen our social safety net and provide relief directly to people, prioritize the needs of workers and communities, build resilience to prevent future crises, build solidarity and equity across communities, generations, and borders, and of course, uphold Indigenous rights and work in partnership with Indigenous peoples. So these are the principles that we've come together to create. And this is going to go live on May 25th. There's going to be a launch of this kind of like alliance effort behind a just recovery, and it will be inviting more organizations to sign on and also do the organizing, behind it. And so this is, when you think about it on a timeline, we're really in this respond phase right now of a just recovery. A lot of people are kind of figuring out what their plans are, and how we lined up the start of this call is like, oh, well, how do we reorient our work to think about it in the context of this huge crisis, this pandemic that we're facing. So a lot of us are still in that respond phase, and I think, we're starting to see people shift towards the recover phase, depending on where in the country you are and the kind of work that you're doing. And so over the course of the next, few months through the summer, we'll definitely be more in a recovery phase where we're trying to influence the ways that governments are putting packages together to respond to this crisis. So for example, Justin Trudeau is put together a green recovery task force that includes Wilkinson, McKenna, and there's one other person I'm forgetting now. And so, yeah, we really want to be thinking about the recovery and thinking about influencing how the recovery responded and recovered, then we're going to be in a rebuild phase, which is basically like, moving us towards a Green New Deal. So I've just put together some photos of what this looks like. There's some great art out in the world right now. Oops. So the last thing I want to land on is that if we're going to be moving from a respond to a recovery phase, and we want to really shape the way that we build out of this crisis, a huge piece of that is going to be connecting with people in our community and talking about and sort of seeding this idea of a just recovery to as many people as possible. And one of the things that my team has done at 350 in Canada is that we've basically created a resource that anyone can use to host a digital teach-in about what a just recovery is and how we win it with people in their community. And so for my orientation, I'm looking at grassroots community groups, whether it's a mutual aid effort in a neighborhood or an existing local group, like a 350 local group that does climate work, and just supporting them to be able to talk about what a just recovery could look like in their team and how to be involved in it. And so we hosted last week a 1-hour mass strategy call where we talked about the phases of a just recovery, what the principles are, and invited people to step up to host a teach-in and a discussion in their community, online, of course, and gave them all the resources they need to do that. So that's, I think, a really important first step in laying the foundation in our communities for a conversation about what does it look like when we start taking steps to recover from this crisis. And then, of course, I think there are a lot of ways that many of you are already taking action locally that fit within the framework of a just recovery. And so just encouraging, whether it's, people who are doing mutual aid organizing or rent strikes or different things like that, it's just really encouraging people to continue to organize behind those more locally adopted and locally necessary actions that they're taking. But ultimately, coming together around this idea that when we have our ducks in a row and when we can, really have the ideas in our mind while decisions are being made, we can really influence the outcomes. And so that's why we're really talking about hosting teach-ins now and having conversations with people in their communities now, so we can really set ourselves up to be able to move through those 3 phases in a way that allows us to build power and win. So I'm not sure if we're taking time for questions now, but I put my email there. If a teach-in is something that you're interested in doing, we do have elected leaders who are going to be hosting teach-ins, which is really cool. It's not something we expected, but also people from different organizations or grassroots groups. So definitely reach out to me if you're interested in that. And I can send along these. There's lots of links linked through my presentation. So you can check out our website and look around on it if you're curious to learn more.
Thank you, Katie. That was great. Thanks for providing that overview. I think what we're going to do is go through, have each speaker or set of speakers go through their presentations, and then we're going to have an opportunity in the breakout sessions, which hopefully as many people who can stick around for that will come back, reflect on the breakout sessions, and then the speakers at the end, of which you are one, will be able to sort of sum up what you learned and ideas that you have coming out of this. So I am pleased to welcome Lisa Helps. Where?
Right here.
Yay.
Thanks, Megan. Good morning, everyone. I'm here in Victoria on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking people of the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And just so everyone knows, I've got to hop off at 10, so apologies for missing anything that happens after that. Since the crisis hit, I've been meeting weekly with our small business community here, and don't want to let them down by missing the first call in 8 weeks. So I'm going to be meeting with them at 10 o'clock. So Rick and Megan asked me to speak a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals as a potential framework. And one of the things that I find so interesting and hopeful about this conversation is, in some ways, a communications exercise is important, and what we're all saying matters. But I think what we're all doing matters just as much. And just hearing the presentation on the Green New Deal and a just recovery, as Katie was going through the principles of a just recovery, they amplify and echo some of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think I'm reading, I know Megan's going to be talking about the donut next. I'm in the middle of reading Donut Economics, which was part of the donut was being discussed as the Sustainable Development Goals were being drafted. So I think it is important that we find a common language, but I feel like we have a common language, and we're just maybe using a little bit of different words as the frame, which is why this conversation is so important. So I'll just talk very briefly about the Sustainable Development Goals. I want to make sure that I get to hear the donut talk, so I don't want to take up too much time. And what we're doing here on the ground in Victoria, which quite frankly, we're doing a lot, but we're just beginning to turn our minds to the Sustainable Development Goals for a way of thinking, and in fact, a way of measuring. So for me, the Sustainable Development Goals obviously came on my radar when they were adopted, but they were just kind of floating out there as this global framework for a just society. And I was invited last year to Heidelberg, Germany, to speak at an international conference on climate collaboration, or collaboration for climate action. And it was about, I would say 40-60. So 60% of the people were there from the global north and 40% of the people were there from the global south. And everyone from the global south was wearing one of these pins, which are the Sustainable Development Goals pins. And they were talking just as much, if not more, about the Sustainable Development Goals than about the Paris Agreement or climate action. And really, it was a huge wake-up call for me to understand the I guess stock that the global south and people from there put into the Sustainable Development Goals that must be achieved at the same time as we're achieving the Paris climate targets. And so I took that very seriously and came back to Victoria thinking that we needed to look at how can we, even in especially in so-called first world context, look at the Sustainable Development Goals, take them more seriously, even as we're working towards zero carbon prosperity and zero carbon economies. And so I worked with an organization called the New Cities Foundation, and we actually, just before COVID, it was the most bizarre situation ever. It was on March 10th and 11th. We hosted a conference here in Victoria with the New Cities Foundation and the Victoria Foundation on implementing the SDGs in Canada. And it was a national conference. We had Indigenous leaders from across the country, nonprofit leaders, business leaders. But again, it was very bizarre. It was just as people were deciding they weren't going to travel for COVID and before Zoom had taken place. So it was a very odd conference in terms of who was there. But I think those of us who were there, there were some good panels, some good discussions on really the challenges of implementing the SDGs in Canada, particularly as nonprofit leaders, as local leaders. And it's not so much a problem of action. The actions are all there, but it's in terms of how do we think about the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to frame, a way to discuss, and a way to measure. And so coming out of that conference, and again, it was just a couple of months ago, I've started to turn my mind to that a little bit. And I just want to share a couple of examples with you today to make this as concrete as possible. So the first one is I'm involved in an initiative here on Vancouver Island called the Coastal Communities Social Procurement Initiative. And this initiative is about 3 or 4 years old, depending on how you count. And it's to work together with local governments on Vancouver Island and Indigenous communities to make sure that as we're spending money as local governments, we're doing it in a way that's going to create stronger local economies, that's going to increase social enterprise economy, increase local food supply, all of those things. And so the initiative is going well. There are 21 member local governments. Now we're deciding, how are we going to know if we're successful? Like, is it just about how much money is spent locally, or is there more? And so to measure our impact with procurement, we're actually developing an island-wide framework using the Sustainable Development Goals to say how, through the way we procure as local governments and Indigenous communities on Vancouver Island, how are we achieving these goals? So a measurement framework is being developed, and I'm really excited about that and happy to share more once it's developed. But again, that's one concrete way to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to see, are we achieving the kinds of things we're setting out to achieve, in this case, by procuring locally and sustainably and inclusively. The other thing, though, that I think is probably more relevant for all of us is to think about the SDGs and climate action. And one of the things that, you know, the kind of shortest way of putting it is I've come to see the Sustainable Development Goals as the equity lens on the Paris Agreement. And so if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals as the equity lens on the Paris Agreement, that charges all of us who are taking climate action to think differently about some of the actions that we're taking. And so very, very quickly and very specifically, the two biggest sources of emissions in any city are buildings and transportation. So building retrofits are obviously a key. New builds are easier because you can put policies in place, but building retrofits and transportation. And so what if, as we were retrofitting buildings and building sustainable transportation networks, what if we thought about those two things through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals? So I'll give you an example of what not to do or how not to think, and then I'll look at the Sustainable Development Goals and share how I think they might be useful. So, you know, when we think about building retrofits, the first thing that's easiest is to think about oil to heat pump projects in single family homes. Well, right then and there, by starting with that, you're starting with people who already have the privilege to own a home. You're starting with people who are wealthy enough to install a heat pump. And those things are important, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the easiest solutions aren't the most, don't create the most equity or help to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals more generally. So, you know, so that's a kind of what not to do. And then I'll talk about what to do. And then the easiest one for transportation, we always think about, well, we need more electric vehicle charging stations. That's the first thing people go to for homes is home energy retrofits for single family dwellings because it's easiest. The first thing that people go to, you know, the knee jerk is, well, we need more EV charging stations. Well, again, that's great if you're privileged enough to own a car. So what if, and then, you know, I'm not going to read through all of the Sustainable Development Goals, but what if, as we were approaching building retrofits and retrofitting the transportation system for low carbon prosperity, what if we thought about how could we do those two things, which again, I'm focusing on those because those are the main sources of emissions in every city across the world. What if, as we were retrofitting homes and buildings and building sustainable transportation, what if we thought about, and not just thought about, but measured, how do we also work towards ending poverty while we do that? What kinds of job creations could be initiated? What kinds of utility bills could be reduced if we start with the poorest people and bringing down their utility bills? So that's goal number one. Goal number three, how could we, through the building retrofit program and sustainable transportation programs, how can we create healthy lives and well-being for all ages? Goal number four, and again, some of these are a stretch, but if we think through transportation and buildings through the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number four is how can we ensure ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities. There's a guy named Sean Loney from Winnipeg, and he's got a great book called Reconciliation and the Solutions Economy. And he talks about in that book, training Indigenous people, training people coming off the streets in Winnipeg to install and retrofit housing and affordable housing. So again, it might seem like, why would we be thinking about job training when we're thinking about climate action? But I think, and again, the principles that Katie talked about fit into this. Goal number 5, achieve gender equality. Can we think about building retrofits and transportation through the lens of gender equality? I could think of a whole series of ways that we could do that. Again, I'm not going to go through all the goals. I've written down, if just for transportation and building retrofits, I think goals 1, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, we can achieve those sustainable development goals simply by looking differently at how we approach buildings and transportation, which again are the 2 largest sources of emissions. So are we doing that right now in the city of Victoria? Not explicitly, but I think there's a real opportunity. And again, it fits with a just recovery, it fits with a Green New Deal, it fits with the donut. But I think the bottom line is, and I agree wholeheartedly with Katie, that COVID has laid bare the vulnerabilities that already existed in Canadian society. And we can use this next few weeks and months to shift. And again, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. I wouldn't get too caught up on how we talk about what we're doing. But I think as long as we're all aligned with the principles, and more importantly, as long as we're all taking action, not only to save the planet, because as we know, that's not good enough, but to make sure that we're achieving equity and justice and inclusivity at the same time. So I'll leave it at that. And thanks for inviting me to be here.
Thank you, Lisa. That was awesome. So I drew the short stick, and I am the presenter for the donut economics. So I am not an expert by any stretch, but at EcoCities last year, Kate Raworth presented the donut economics. So I think some of us who were there maybe learned about that. And I'll just share my screen now, if I can figure out how to do this. I've done it all wrong. Hold on. Is it working? Did I do it?
Nope, not yet.
I'm like,
There you go.
now I'm sharing my screen, but there's nothing on my screen that I want to share. Hold. Now we're there, right? Yes?
We're good.
Okay. So Kate Raworth is, I'm just looking for my slides here. How about, so I'm trying to hit next and it's just not, there we go. Okay, so refers to herself as a renegade economist. She studied economics, classical, traditional economics at Oxford, and she currently serves as a senior research associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute. The donut economics actually came out as a white paper when she was working with Oxfam in 2012 and was released as a book in 2017. So the Donut Economics Action Lab, the acronym is DEAL, is scheduled to launch in June of this year. And the goal, that's one of my dogs not being good. So the goal of Kate's work is humanity's 21st century challenge is to meet the needs of all within the means of the planet. So when I first learned of her work, I was really excited about talking about equity, the ecological limits, and climate together. I thought that was an important conversation. So I'm going to share this video, which hopefully doesn't get too gunked up.
In the 20th century, economics lost its purpose and started chasing the false goal of GDP growth. In recent decades, that has pushed many societies into deepening inequality, and it's pushing us all towards ecological collapse.
That didn't work. Retry that again. I don't know what happened.
In the 20th century, economics lost its purpose and started chasing the false goal of GDP growth. In recent decades, that has pushed many societies into deepening inequality, and it's pushing us all towards ecological collapse. This century calls for a new goal, meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. In other words, it's time to get into the donut, the sweet spot for humanity. But that's no easy task. Today, billions of people still fall short of their daily needs, from food, housing, and energy to healthcare and education. And yet collectively, we've already overshot our pressure on some of Earth's most critical life support systems, driving climate change and the breakdown of biodiversity. What we do to this Earth in the next 50 years will shape the next 10,000. So let's replace that last century goal of endless growth with the goal of thriving in balance. And if we're to have half a chance of getting there, what economic mindset would be fit for the task?
So our current economic framework is colonial. Free market capitalism, neoliberalism, globalization, supply and demand, rational man. We're all in it for ourselves is the sort of thing that economists are taught. And the economic laws of motion, which Kate points out are not actually laws at all in the same way that other laws of science exist. So Kuznets curves for inequality, which suggested that while inequality would increase at first, it would decrease over time. And in the 90s, the Kuznets curve for pollution was that over time, pollution would actually decrease. That hasn't proven to be true, especially when you're talking about global pollutants like carbon dioxide. And then the idea of endless economic growth, as she talked about GDP. So the first thing that Kate teaches her students is that the economy is embedded within society and within the planet. It doesn't exist outside of it, which is what some people learned, that the economics is on its own, and that of course isn't true. So she presents 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. So change the goal cannot be just endless growth. Growth should not be the goal. She suggests seeking to align the organization's purpose, networks, governance, ownership, and finance with the goal. And she sees it as thriving cities, thriving planet, equity, health and well-being, like changing actually the goal. So the big picture is to recognize the potentials of the households, the commons, the market, and the state. Typically, it was the market and the state. And the household disproportionately impacts women because a lot of labor is not counted in our economic systems at all. And obviously, for the environment, externalities are not accounted for. And ensure that finance serves the work rather than drives it. So the nurture human nature, which is her third way to think like a 21st century economist, is to promote diversity, participation, collaboration, and reciprocity, strengthen community networks, and work with a spirit of trust, and care for the well-being of the team. So the systems thinking, experiment, learn, adapt, evolve, and aim for continuous improvements. Be aware of feedback loops and tipping points. Distributive economy, so work in the spirit of open design and share the value with people who co-create it. Beware of the power and seek to redistribute it to improve equity amongst stakeholders. Be regenerative, so this kind of touches on the circular economy, sharing and repairing and regenerating. I think that she points out some concerns about who owns the circular economy. So that's something, as we really unpack economics, we need to be aware of. I've expressed similar concerns to Rick and on many occasions. And then be agnostic about growth. So really aim to thrive rather than just to grow. So growth not being a goal in and of itself is important. So in the donut, which you saw in the video, the intersection is where people fall short. The outer section is where we overshoot the limits of the planet. And then the inner green section is the safe and just space for humanity. So Lead University did these amazing visualizations, which we can share the website. But these are 3 examples, Cameroon, Costa Rica, and Canada, where you can see countries that are falling far short on the social indicators, but staying within the means of the planet. And so Cameroon obviously falls short of the social indicators, but stays within the means of the planet for the most part. Land use change is a little outside its boundaries. Costa Rica meets more of the social needs and is overshooting. Their overshoot is more limited. And then Canada almost meets the needs of all the people, according, and I'll show you the data, where this came from, but is completely overshooting all of the planetary boundaries, except for blue water in this case. So the indicators, which we talk a lot about data, where does it come from? What are we measuring? How are we measuring it? So I won't go into great detail here other than to say that this loosely came from for this data actually came from downscaling 5 planetary indicators to per capita equivalents. There are the social indicators came from, as Lisa was talking about, the SDGs. So that framework for looking at human rights, these indicate life satisfaction, health, life expectancy, nutrition, were all derived from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So recently, many of us might have caught wind that in April, Amsterdam became the first city to launch a downscaled version or a city-scaled version of the donut into city policy. And I think that's something I encourage everyone to look at the plan. It's actually quite interesting. I mean, the big question was, how can our city be a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So I really like that conversation, which I think is one that we can look at in our own communities to talk about, not just what does it mean for us to have health and well-being, what does it mean for the world to have health and well-being? So this was an interesting framework. The Donut Economics Lab is launching in June, and I will send everyone to their website because I'm not an expert, but I had to do this presentation because no one else would. And I think it's probably a good segue, if I can get back into all here. I can't get.
And from within Zoom, you can unshare your screen.
There we go. I did it. Yay. So that's just a really high level overview of the donut. I definitely encourage you to go to her website. There's great videos and more research. And the Action Lab is starting up in June. So Portland and Philadelphia, I believe, are also pilot cities for what that looks like at a local scale. And I am going to hand it over to the experts who are going to bring this all home, Dr. Jenny Moore and Cor Halsworth, who I think are going to connect it all together. So welcome and thank you.
All right.
Jenny.
I've shared the screen, hopefully. Jenny, you can see
Yep.
that?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So thanks for the opportunity. That was great, Megan. I think you did a fantastic job. That was awesome. So really, it is true. We're everybody's saying the same thing. Where Kate Roberts' work on donut economics comes from is it originates in what's called ecological economics, that sees the world as society evolving from our planet, economics evolving from societal values, what we choose to exchange, and all of that exerts influence on us and us on the planet. But at the same time, ultimately, we're dependent on that planet. So if we don't have a healthy ecosystem, if we don't have a socially just world, we will not get to sustainability. And for those of you that are familiar with our Common Future, the original work, sustainability is the social justice element with the ecological element embedded together. If all we're interested in is securing a nice environment for ourselves, that's environmentalism. So I'm really inspired by this conversation, the embracing of the social justice piece, the SDGs, etc. So I'll just go through very quickly some of the work that we're doing at the EcoCity Center, which evolved from the EcoCity Summit as a legacy of that project, and the work that we do with EcoCity Builders, which is an international NGO that does a lot of its work in the global south. So next slide. So this basically is the same as what you just saw for donut economics. It's the planetary boundaries without the social ceiling or social floor, excuse me, inside of it that we have to live within. And of course, with COVID-19, it is actually forecasted as an evolution of our increasing overtake of global natural capital assets. Most people are shocked to know that humanity now appropriates over 80%. In fact, in the 90s, indirectly, 90% of all global biocapacity on Earth, 90%, over 90% of all global biocapacity on Earth is now appropriated to the human enterprise. And so as we tightly couple with wildlife and nature, we create increasingly brittle systems because there's less and less ecological resilience available for the world. Remember that what we just saw from Megan, if the world needs to stay intact with global ecosystems and then society is malaligned in our belief systems with our economy, for example, we are not going to last very long no matter what. COVID is just one example. It's climate action, tip of the iceberg, food insecurity, all kinds of things are coming. So next slide. For our next slide, thanks. So the EcoCity Framework and Standards, I'm working right now with several UN agencies, UN Habitat, United Nations Environment Program, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And the research that I work on is evolving indicators through the EcoCity Framework and Standards, which really speaks to goal 11 of the SDGs, but maps to every single of the 17 goals. In the Global South, people use the framework through the work of EcoCity Builders to develop locally relevant pathways to achieving the SDGs because it's framed from a local government perspective. So we start with ecological imperatives. The work that I do on the ecological footprint tool helps support that. Then we look at if biocapacity, carrying capacity, and ecological integrity by Lisa. Then from that, society evolved and we look at healthy culture. So that's traditional knowledge, eco-literacy, the kinds of things that we need in order for us to create a socially just world, community capacity and governance, participatory decision-making, equitable economy. So how are things distributed in terms of fairness and who benefits and who pays and how are we distributing that? Education, lifelong access to education, well-being, etc. So a lot of the social justice, equity, gender are embedded in that. And then we look at the biogeophysical features. So again, clean air, healthy soil, access to healthy food. What are the biophysical conditions we need within our local communities to access the resources? And then how are we impacting that in the global commons, whether or not we're trading equitably through fair trade. And then finally, urban design. So how does all of this inform our cities? So I loved what Lisa was talking about in terms of thinking about transportation and buildings and what are the equity impacts. We cannot, and I think an interesting exercise for government, I do a lot of work with the city of Vancouver, is we all collect taxes, we all distribute millions of dollars in ongoing work of our communities. How much of that tax base is going into recreating the very problems that we say we're trying to solve with our climate emergencies and other things. So policy alignment internally at the municipal scale could be a very enlightening exercise to see how much we're actually spending on recreating the very problems we're trying to solve and then thinking through the tweaking, like the procurement example, that framework for procurement that starts to put the money towards the goals that we say we want to achieve. And so in the urban design, we're really all about, a lot of it will sound familiar, access by proximity, really tightly coupling to get that 86% walking mode split for transportation by cycling, walking, or transit, safe and affordable housing access, green buildings, environmentally friendly transportation. So these things really nested within each other, similar to the global economics, or sorry, the ecological economics framework that Kate talks about, which I think is great. And my main message here is, whatever you choose, use whatever's useful to you. These are all driving towards a global agenda, culture and can share, where the over consumers are being asked to reduce their total take on nature in terms of energy materials consumption, the end consumers are going to get helped to get to access to a dignified life, and everyone's investing in natural capital assets to stabilize our global ecosystems that we all depend on universally. Next slide. So a lot of the work that I'm working on is with ecological footprint. It comes out of the same thinking of ecological economics that Kate Raworth's work comes from. It really understands that we have to live within the global commons indefinitely. So we're simply working with how much forest land is required to produce the materials we use, how much forest land is required for carbon sequestration, acknowledging that the oceans are already at saturation, which is why we're seeing collapse in corals, 50% at this point, and related fisheries collapses globally. It looks at our grazing land for foddering animals, as well as cropland that's used to divert to animal feed, including beef, which is a big impact for us, dairy products, big impacts, but also cropland to feed ourselves in terms of grains and croplands to produce textile materials like cotton, urban land. Usually it's agricultural land in Vancouver, where I'm from, in West Vancouver, home of the Squamish people, traditional lands of Coast Salish and Squamish. This is the built area, and then finally the coastal land. So if you can keep going, next slide. So what we do is we look at energy and material flows in the urban metabolism. So looking at the city as a human body, how much energy materials are being consumed by the city, both through appropriation of locally available resources as well as international trade, to support the lifestyles that our citizens are leading in terms of consumables and waste, transportation, buildings, food, and water. And we use that information to then put out the greenhouse gas emission inventories aligned with the Partners for Climate Protection protocol for community emission inventories, a territorial emission inventory. We can also generate the consumption-based emission inventories. So my work will support City of Vancouver, for example, and you'll hear more about the outputs of some of this work from Cora and One Planet Saanich. And then from those metrics, we also derive the ecological footprint, which adds to it not just the land used to sequester waste in the form of carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, but also to produce the resources that we're consuming, whether it's in the form of fibers, food, materials for buildings, etc. Next slide. So in order to help make it easy for communities to access information, I have created a tool that basically takes hundreds and hundreds of calculations and puts them into an easy to use online version, thanks to funding from the Real Estate Foundation of British Columbia and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network prior to that. So we have been piloting now with 10 municipalities in BC to basically evolve this tool with a vision that it can be easily accessible by all municipalities in the province. So it will generate both the carbon footprint of the CBEI, the territorial, and the ecological footprint assessment. And we can take the data output and pinpoint then for municipalities, or municipalities can do this for themselves. Ultimately, that's the vision with this pilot, where the biggest impacts and drivers are in a disaggregated information way. So for food, like what aspects of food are driving the biggest footprint impacts? Most people used to think it was food miles. Now we know it's actually dietary choices and food waste. Within dietary choices, it's really getting at the animal proteins. Just as an example, we can do it for all the different categories based on municipal data that municipalities are already using for the most part to manage. So it's a different way to get at a consumption-based emission inventory from, for example, C40 that's using international trade statistics, which is also very helpful. It's just if you want that disaggregated policy alignment exercise, you need the local data. Next slide. And we're creating a app that hopefully is going to be something that citizens in those communities that are working with measuring their sustainability gap and trying to close it through whether it's ecological footprint that supports the carrying capacity target in the EcoCity standards, whether it's carbon-based emission inventories or Scope 3 for consumption-based. This app tries to engage users in understanding what's driving them in their lifestyle. Is it more time with family, eating healthier, and then shows them what their footprint is relative to the average in their community. and then encourages them and helps re-engage with them to take actions to reduce their footprint. Next slide. So I think at this point, we'll turn it over to Cora. So the outputs of the products that I've been talking about have been used in a One Planet Saanich initiative that Cora has been leading. And I'll turn it over at this point to Cora Halsworth. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jenny. So I kind of have two hats, although they're kind of half and half hats. They're kind of the same thing. I work part-time at BCIT, and I'm also a senior associate with One Earth. So I've been working with Jenny on helping pilot the EcoCity footprint tool and developing the lighter footprint app, and now also working in Saanich with One Earth to apply the results that we have from the tool in Saanich. So for those of you who don't know, Saanich is based in Greater Victoria. So I'm coming to you from Saanich in the traditional territories of the WSÁNEĆ and Lekwungen speaking people. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank that. So I'm going to give you an overview of the One Planet Living framework. So this was a framework created by Bioregional UK. It's a planning framework aimed at engaging organizations and individuals and in the pursuit of a happy, healthy future within the natural limits of the planet. So this One Planet Living. So as you'll see, the framework is complementary to the tools that Jenny has outlined. So the analysis and metrics from the tool, the EcoCity footprint tool, and the lighter footprint app, they'll provide the data analysis to help inform the One Planet Living framework. At the core of the One Planet Living framework are the 10 One Planet Living principles you'll see on the slide here. According to Bioregional, these principles were actually the precursors to the SDGs. I'd suggest that they're an excellent way to engage individuals and organizations at the community level. The power of these principles is their simplicity and ability to engage a broad spectrum of people. We also like that they begin with health, happiness, and equity. So these are principles that are all too often get left out as sustainability efforts. So anyone jump in and let me know if I'm cutting out. If I have any internet issues, just hop in and tell me I'm cutting out and I'll turn my video off, just as an aside. So the core of the framework is also the carbon footprint and the ecological, most importantly, the ecological footprint. So the ultimate goal is to achieve One Planet Living. So in 2018, the District of Saanich was one of 4 international cities chosen to participate in the One Planet Cities pilot project, which was being headed up by Bioregional. And so this was largely due to the fact that Jenny and I had been working with Saanich to create an ecological footprint assessment for Saanich. So the other cities that were involved were Durban, Oxfordshire, and Elsinore. So each of these cities have been using the One Planet Living framework as a tool to engage a range of stakeholders in collaborative sustainability planning efforts. So in Saanich, I'm leading this role, as I mentioned, with One Earth, Vancouver-based NGO One Earth, and also supported by the UK-based Bioregional, and obviously Jenny's work at BCIT. So we've engaged schools, businesses, faith groups, community groups to create their own One Planet action plans, and we're now focusing on enhancing their ability to collaborate. We're exploring opportunities to extend this initiative to the region and Vancouver Island with the support of Fred Haynes, the Mayor of Saanich. Throughout the initiative, we've had access to the online sustainability planning tools that Bioregional has created, as well as the outputs from the EcoCity footprint tool. So you've already heard about the EcoCity footprint tool and the analysis and how that helped inform the work in Saanich. So these are both, and the app as well, both powerful tools for supporting work in communities. So the additional tools from Bioregional are the oneplanet.com, which is an action planning tool that is easy to use and helps show the interconnection between all of the different efforts. You can see a mind map on the screen right here on the right, shows how all of the different goals and actions can contribute to each other, and also helps organizations link up with community-wide objectives as well. So you can interconnect different organizations' plans. And so another important addition to this tool is initially it was developed to align with the One Planet principles, but you can toggle over to the Sustainable Development Goals now as well. So our approach in Saanich was to advance sustainability through this action-oriented stakeholder engagement process. So we started with a sustainability scan of the community using the 10 principles, and also the understanding of our ecological and carbon footprint to identify where we're at, where we need to get to. Then the organizations within the region developed connected action plans to address the priorities that we identified in the scan and the footprint results. So this unified approach to collaborate on planning and implementing and measuring and sharing successes in our region, we theorize will help get us to local solutions faster. So individuals and organizations can see how their actions are contributing to regional and global targets and plans. And this will help inspire action, greater action and aligned behavior change. So of note also through our partnership with District of Saanich, they were a core lead on this project as well. The process that we undertook in One Planet Saanich helped directly inform their updated climate plan, which came out last year. Oh, sorry, I just realized that was animated. You didn't see those extra words there. Now you see them. So there's lots of frameworks out there, and I do believe this approach provides something a little bit unique. And I think, as Jenny noted and Lisa noted, it doesn't matter so much which framework you use, as long as you choose the entry point that's good for you, and maybe you can use multiple ones. I think the uniqueness of what we've done in Saanich is, well, it's important that we're focusing on the key measures of sustainability, the ecological footprint, and the consumption-based emission inventory, and helping organizations prioritize measures that are driving down the footprint. And we're building a network of organizations that are supporting each other and uncovering ways to collaborate. And we're also connecting those individual efforts with community-wide objectives. We also have placed a special emphasis on engaging and empowering educators and students, which I think is a powerful opportunity. And finally, building bridges between organizations and local expertise. And we've got a couple of them on this call right here. Trevor Hancock and Ted Sheldon have been really instrumental in the One Planet Saanich work, One Planet region work, building that connection between this expert knowledge that we have in the region, getting that in front of the organizations that are trying to act. And in terms of, so we've been doing a lot of thinking, as Katie was mentioning also, what does this mean now that we've got the COVID reality? So I think the One Planet Living approach and all of the other examples that we've heard today are going to help us frame how we bounce back. And this is a term coined, I believe, by Trevor Hancock. Bouncing back is the path forward. So using the principles and tools to, and the understanding of the footprint can help us figure out ways to bounce back better. And so this is something we're exploring in Saanich right now, using the principles and footprint to identify how we can collaborate on a path towards a more sustainable future. So I've just highlighted a few examples on the screen here. So, and I think I will just leave it there and looking forward to discussion. Oh, and I have one more slide with our contact information. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just thought I was frozen for a second there. I didn't see anybody moving.
Oh, thank you. Well, to everyone for all of those presentations. I'm sure everyone is clamoring to get into these smaller groups so we can ask questions and talk a little bit more. So I'm gonna have these are always the moments I have when everyone's like, don't go off script, and I always go off script. So we're really talked a lot about what we wanted to happen in these breakout sessions. And so sometimes it's helpful to have that one question that you come back and report on. I'll give you, I guess, a broader framework, but I'm really interested in, you can come back and answer this question, or you can come back and teach us something. So we're very open to listening because you're a lot of very smart people gathered together. So some of the questions that we were thinking of is based on what you've learned. What are some elements that must exist in your local framework for change in your local community? And I think I immediately, because we're on this tight timeline, people are suffering and we're living way beyond our means, and we know we need to take action quickly. How do these integrate in local government? So we have official community plans, we have energy plans, we have housing plans, we have various plans. So how do these integrate or replace those? Because I mean, at the end of the day, we first want to figure out what the frame is, what's important, what are we trying to accomplish, and then we need to quickly put it into action. So I will leave you with a couple questions. Again, feel free to freestyle it and come back with something else if you want to. So common themes that you see among the frames, I think would be one question: what common elements be? And are there any that are so vastly different that you can't imagine them being bridged to come back? And I guess another question is, what are some of the challenges to communicating this framework for change in your community? I know I can just speak personally that it's very difficult to talk to a local community about this global issue and a global responsibility. So I would love to hear if other people have had, I think One Planet, other places that are further along that have done that work have probably started talking about that question. So those are a couple high-level questions. Alex is the tech guru who is breaking us all into groups. So we're gonna break into groups. We're a little bit behind, but that's okay. I think we can just sum up more quickly. So we're gonna break into breakout groups for about 25 minutes. And there'll be a moderator for each group. Thank you for everyone who I roped into moderating or the groups. And so what happens next? Magically, we all just appear in different rooms.
Yep, that's basically what happens. Okay, everybody just hold on while it separates you, okay? Vicky, are you there? Welcome back, everybody.
Magic.
So Rick, it's all about making the world great again.
That's right.
We're on it.
Yeah. Where's Trump when you need him? He should be in here.
What happens in Zoom breakouts stays in Zoom breakouts.
There we
Rick,
are.
I'm going to actually get you to do the report back for our group because I have to hop off this call in 9 minutes. I forgot I have another one that's starting right away.
Okay, Tika.
Thanks, Tika.
Sorry.
Ooh.
Well, thanks everyone for, is everyone back, Alex? Generally? Yes.
I am not actually, I think, yeah, everyone's back. Yeah. There's a lot less people than there was when I sent everyone to groups. That's
We're like, we think they're back. I'm not sure.
People, but yeah, I think we're back.
So Alex, do you mind just because you know who the groups were, just to go in order of each group reporting back for, I would say like try to keep it 2 minutes, like, and we'll see if we have, how many groups do we have?
There's only 4 groups.
Okay, so yeah, I think up to 5 minutes would work. So I'd love to hear back from the groups.
Okay, so group 1 is Judy's group.
Actually, I passed the torch to Megan in the group for that.
Excellent.
Okay. Am I off? I am. There we go. Hi, folks. We had a great group. So we have sort of 6 key points that came away from our discussion. One was around the pros and challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals as a tool. The risk of dilution, that note that was in the chat group of mile wide and an inch deep, and not allowing for sort of some deeper penetration into some of the issues. But at the same time, it providing us with tools to bring in sometimes non-traditional allies. An example was even finance departments within local government, or land use decision-making, which sometimes was falling outside of these conversations. So good chat about the pros and cons. How do we get continuation? How do we get climate away from being marginalized? The sustainable goals can be helpful, but if we lose the climate urgency, we're not going to be able to create the action that we collectively feel is necessary. So if it results in dilution, is it furthering our objectives? Concern number 3, concern about the new Green Deal and the language, just the obvious affiliation with partisan politics, both in the US and Canada. So this notion of a leftist affiliation, which doesn't bother me, but it does as a communicator. So that's a concern. A 4th what was raised in our group is there was the rural-urban divide, forestry issues, and forestry's contribution to carbon emissions or opportunity for carbon sequestration. And it being a huge part of, there was some great numbers. I can't remember, it was like 78% of carbon emissions in Canada. So when the focus is on urban, we miss some very, very key forestry issues, which 2 of us were involved in. Number 5 is, how do we do a better job of bridging NGO work with local government and local councils, getting them a package that's readable and doable? They are overwhelmed and inundated with models and information. How do we do a better job of supporting their work? And number 5, is there something unbridgeable? We have an overwhelming communication challenge around asking people to dramatically reduce their standards of living in a global context. There was a sense of feeling that this is insurmountable, yet on the other hand, local government seeing that there was an opportunity because of the ability of local government to be tangibly responsive to be able to do things that are direct action and to be outside of traditional sort of partisan camps. And that perhaps that bridging of understanding about the changes we need to be making could lie with local government. There may be more opportunity for it to be handled locally or bioregionally than at other levels. That's it.
Awesome. Good job, group one. Okay, we're on to group two.
Okay, excellent. Group two is Will's group.
I am unmuted, and I think I made the mistake of both trying to be note taker and moderator, so my notes are a bit scratchy here. But we started off with what are the core elements you need to exist for your local framework for change, and just on a very sort of nuts and bolts level, I think Michael from Vancouver was talking about dealing with city staff, and I think for all elected officials, how do you deal with staff members who are just aren't getting it or aren't on board? And a couple of messages came from Cora, finding the champions within each department wherever possible, and ensuring that you've got strong messaging from the mayor and the CAO that this is the direction that things are taking, and that people and leadership from the top that brings more reluctant members of staff on board. There were also questions about how to get business and sort of the larger community on board, also a challenge, and just some thoughts about looking for commonalities between groups which might not previously have had connections. I was just mentioning an example from my community where our downtown BIA, which is all about parking, and our cycling coalition, which is about the opposite, have post-COVID come together to look at ways to plan to shut down streets together, because they both, business now needs that kind of space in order to be able to socially distance, and active transportation people want it too. So I think there may well be commonalities that we haven't seen before in terms of building community support. We talked a bit about common frames that were emerging, and an awareness that there's a lack of awareness probably in the general public around the SDGs or donut economics. There's something that's more kind of inside baseball that folks like us would be talking about, whereas the Green New Deal has a greater level of awareness. Seth Klein was saying that a recent poll he'd done was shown roughly 16% of Canadians on the street were familiar with the Green New Deal, which is, you know, quite a promisingly large number to build upon. And just some possible concerns with the Green New Deal as to challenges with it being conflated with the Green Party and seen as a partisan issue. And then I think it was Michael brought up the larger question of when people are speaking of a green recovery, and we're hearing it spoken at different levels of government, what is meant by that? And I suppose one possible way of thinking about that is perhaps that's encouraging, because any of the frameworks we're talking about could be the core of a green recovery. And maybe that two-word phrase is the beginnings of an umbrella term which could address or could encompass any of the particular frameworks we're talking about. So maybe that's the first sort of green shoot of synthesis. And some of the other things I think were dealt with a bit in the previous report back. So I'll probably leave it there then. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. Good job, group two. Number
three is you, Megan.
Who was the winner?
I think, well, I'll start, and then I think we lost Tika, so it might just have to be me, unless Andreas and Patricia, you jump in too. So one of the questions one of the questions we asked was, what's the point of a framework? Like, why are we even having this conversation? And I think we came up with three key reasons and sort of components of a framework and why we need it. The first is to frame the vision. And I think Patricia did a really nice job of articulating that. And Patricia, if you want, you can jump in a sec as I go through it. The second one is that it helps to clarify our message. Again, by being able to reduce a big complex idea into a simple repeatable message that can, gain power over time. And I think Green New Deal has shown sort of the impact, the fact that most people remember it. It's a name, but it's also a really clear message. Make America Great in the US is another good example of on the other side of it. And the third reason for having a framework is it's an accountability framework, and that I think we saw that with the SDGs and with One Planet, that they have built into them a set of metrics for measuring progress and holding us accountable. So now, part of the idea of sort of unifying our framework, or at least having a really clear translation between the various frameworks, is that accountability, for example, has much more power when it's shared. Like if every local government was operating under the same accountability framework, it's more likely to take hold and help propel action. And even more powerful if the feds and the provinces also were all sharing the same accountability framework. I think we would see, more likely to drive action as well. Patricia, did you want to say something more about vision? I thought as you wrapped it up, you framed it up really nicely.
Yeah, I think it's just important that we can all visualize what we're working towards and how we fit into that. Because I think as we noticed in our group, our communities are all different and people within our communities are different. And so if we can have some kind of common vision that helps us to really understand and see and visualize what that means for our lives in particular, I think that that's always helpful to move forward.
Okay, and anything else from our group before I hand it off? Mary or Andreas, you're good? Okay, that's it for us.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then the last group is Nadine.
Okay, let me just pull up my notes here. I think our one of our main considerations was that inclusivity needs to be at the heart of any of the local frameworks, and also that the frameworks are somewhat too high level to be useful in communicating them outwards, and that we actually need, they're helpful internally, but they're not so helpful for talking to the community about it. We talked about simplifying some of the frameworks around, let me see if I got this right. Food security, I think, was missing in some of them. So it could be food, buildings, consumables, and waste, transportation, and water. We also talked about the resourcing issue around like metrics, that if, there's some perception that we have to measure everything. And we know that small municipalities in particular, but all municipalities have limited resources. And sometimes the option is between measuring it or doing it, both from the financing of doing it, but also the staff capacity. Is there anything that I'm missing that my group wants to jump in on there?
Nice job. Sound good, Nadine.
Nadine just sums it up. Bam, bam, bam. There you go.
Known for my brevity.
I know. I was like, and I'm still writing notes from what you said. That's great. I like the measuring it or doing it. Did anyone else have anything from that?
Maybe I'll jump in here, fourth group back to the third group, Rick, Ted here. I loved your three components of a framework, right? Framing the vision, clarifying the message, and then accountability. And then playing on your word, inclusivity, Nadine, is that empowerment right up front. One of the values of a framework is the engagement and the inclusivity of the people developing it, so that the accountability is, there's a collective development. By collectively developing it, you're collectively owning into its ultimate results. So it's kind of a nice closed loop, if you will, that way.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. I mean, we talked in our group about the fact that we need to be, as local government elected people and NGOs, like anyone working on this needs to really be better listeners than talkers. And that we need to make sure that the voices that have been intentionally excluded from this oppressive system are centered in all of our discussions. I think Nadine does an amazing job, and I learn a lot from her on actually putting that into action. And how you better engage with the people who are not likely to ever show up at a public hearing, not likely to ever, and just the importance of actually starting to do the work without necessarily framing it under climate. Like I loved Lisa's point about just building. We know we need affordable housing that's built to withstand the future climate. And that it needs to be decarbonized. We don't have to frame that in, we can frame it as housing. It doesn't necessarily have to be framed as climate. And then we get more people to support those. So I love that the 5, and I think we're kind of working towards that in the communications group, the moves, like what they would be, and maybe under a broader vision that, to Ted's point, are, is a grassroots sort of ground up approach, not a top down approach, which I think is how Climate Caucus aims to work. So I would love to take the last little bit to have the opportunity for our amazing speaker panel to reflect on some of what they've heard and just have a bit of a conversation there. So I don't know if anyone has something burning to say, but just jump. Rick, you're gonna say something?
No, I'm just going to point out that in the chat, there was a conversation about Green New Deal because that was raised. And then, so that might be something to talk about, the partisan lens, the politics around the Green New Deal as well. Megan, you're muted.
Well, I wasn't one of the presenters, but I just reflected on the comment that 16% of people were aware of the Green New Deal when it was spoken, and I would assume that's because they're aware of it because of American media. And that the number that are aware of it as a piece of legislation proposed, be it by Peter Julian or as how the Green Party is describing it, I just suspect that that those 16%, that doesn't represent awareness of the Green New Deal in a Canadian context.
Seth, do you want to chime in on that? Because I think you were involved with doing one of the studies.
Yeah, well, that was my poll. Megan, I suspect you're right, and I also suspect it doesn't matter. I mean, the point is in terms of the point I was going to make, and because we've lost Katie, maybe I can just say a couple pitch for the Green New Deal. All of these frameworks are fantastic. And they're all basically aligned, and they all marry the climate and ecological on the one hand with social justice and equity on the other. But I would make 2 arguments in favor of the Green New Deal. One is that it's where the momentum is. It's where there's some brand recognition. There are existing coalitions in Canada that have already come together around it. And in particular, I think it's a way to honor where these young activists have landed. I mean, all of the young people through our time that mobilized during the federal election, the young climate strikers, that's what their banners say. And so I find it attractive for that reason. The second argument I would make in favor of it is that as we emerge from COVID emergency response and into rebuild is the debate is going to be dominated by jobs and infrastructure. And the Green New Deal is rooted in jobs and infrastructure. That's both physical and social infrastructure. And so it sort of works in terms of the context in which we're all going to find ourselves in at least for the next year, I would say.
Thanks, Seth. Jenny, did you?
Sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree with Seth. I think that, social justice and ecological limits are the fundamental underpinnings of everything that we're doing here. And the Green New Deal, as long as we can hold ourselves and our leaders accountable, your leaders, but also senior government leaders, accountable to what it really means, and make sure it doesn't slide away into business as usual with a Green New banner, then I think absolutely this is the way to go. And these frameworks, you know, the simple one, whether it's food, buildings, consumables, transportation, water, just expanding the scope from buildings and transportation, whatever it is, as long as internally you've got the right intentions and you're finding ways to be involved in inclusive conversations, then Green New Deal could totally be the way we bounce forward to a sustainable future that addresses all of the other problems that the long emergency that we're already in relative to what COVID is bringing about very quickly. So I just, yeah, applaud staff. I think this is the right way to go. Just be careful that it doesn't get co-opted. That's all.
And I think one of the conversations we've had internally, and I think this is a great to hear other perspectives on that, is that local government is unique in that it is nonpartisan, and so you're always working with people. And so I think that's I appreciate that what people have put in the chat. I think just from the perception sometimes in the community is that it is, as I think Rick said, a leftist thing, and that if you're not that, then you're not. And we're trying to find inclusive messaging, but I agree we need to honor, to Seth's point, the fact that that is youth-led, that movement. And you know, it's not about coming up with something new to come up with something new. I think it's the policies that get enacted from these aspirational goals is really what's important. Does anyone else would anyone else like? Cora, love to hear from you.
Yeah, so just in our conversation in our breakout group, we also talked a little bit about metrics, and I don't know, we had a lot of, it was a great conversation, and I think Jenny and I are probably going to go away and talk about how we could best support all of you as municipalities with the EcoCity Center. That's what the center has been established for, to support municipalities. So that's one immediate thing I see that could be helpful, because even if no matter what framework you're selecting to move forward, we do have to make sure we're covering all the bases and, you know, making sure we're getting to the right place, and metrics is a key part of that. And so we propose the ecological footprint as one of the core metrics, but the EcoCity Standards has a full list of different a set of standards that we need to make sure we're, you know, working towards a sustainable future for cities. So I think Jenny and I could, well, Jenny mostly could come back and do a presentation on metrics, just putting Jenny on the spot there. But would love to do something like that. And I see opportunities for some additional projects that we could work on at the EcoCity Center. So we'll be looking for some funding to help support all of the work you're doing, and love to continue this conversation.
Thanks, Cora. We will be following up with you on that. Michael, got anything there, Weeb?
No, I think that the conversation's been great, and I think it'll be interesting to see how we can follow up this conversation with the rest of the week, because I know we do have this conference. So I don't know if Rick or someone wants to talk about how we translate the actions and the conversations we've talked about today with the other multiple days of this week.
Yeah, I can quickly talk about that. So tomorrow we have a panel again with Lisa Helps and the Mayor of Saskatoon and Kitchener that are going to be talking about what's happening on the ground. There will be a number of other panels as well, and some of you have probably seen the agenda that look really interesting. I think Catherine Hayhouse is going to be good, and in particular. And then on Friday, we've got a session that's going to take what we did today, build on what we've learned over the week, and then pull it together into an agenda for action for the next few months. So this has been purposely sort of left open and unstructured, in part because we're listening, as Megan is saying. We're trying to understand, you know, with all of the action that we're doing, and you know, as much as Climate Caucus has been trying to pull it together and sort of build a wave of action across the country, we've run up against the challenge of having different ways of talking about it, different metrics for measuring it, and it's been kind of chaotic. And so we've really, it's been clear, and it's been driven by this sort of just recovery as we pulled together a sort of a framework for action, a framework for requests to the federal government. We need to start by just listening and understanding what other ideas are out there. So again, that's what today is about. That's what tomorrow and Thursday are about. And then Friday, we're going to sum up what we've heard into hopefully like I said, an agenda for action. After that, in the next couple of weeks, the communications team in particular is going to go away and then come back with a proposal to all of Climate Caucus about a unifying framework, or at least a unifying translation of the frameworks. Sort of like, how does all of this fit together from a local lens? And so that's going to happen like I said, in the weeks that follow. And we'll have a big announcement and presentation and meeting about that, hopefully in the beginning of June, I would think. Mike, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it's good to have the kind of context of where we want to go and give us a timeline to recognize why we're having these conversations, but also like how we can pull it all together, and then how we can bring this to the floor of councils across the country to really kind of shape that change and ensure that we're all kind of aligned in the messaging. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
And I will just add to that, we feel like in the same way that climate emergency declarations started at the local level and really spread throughout Canada pretty quickly, that we'd like to have a similar resolution approach to have these resolutions come out of this new broad framework, very mission driven. And we're getting the sense from the federal government, I think that a lot of the funding will come through traditional streams, but may be open to a broader scope. So sometimes, for example, an infrastructure fund may prioritize gray infrastructure. If we can present it as a way that we want this to be green infrastructure, maybe that funding could be expanded to allow that. And if we have lots of local governments saying, we want green infrastructure, like we need our municipal staff to be trained on this, we need our the funding to be prioritized for this, no funding should ever go out without a carbon assessment, etc. I think we're going to make some progress on that. And building on, I think Katie, I know she had to leave, but she said something really important. If your policies can check off these boxes, then great, we'll support it, right? Like they have the values that they want policies to reflect. So I think it's great to listen to that and to understand what's important to people who are driving these movements, and that we make sure that our policies reflect those values. Does anyone else we have a few minutes. That's awesome. That never happens. Tracy, do you have anything to say up there?
I have a quick something, if that's okay. I noted that the youth came up a lot as a part of our inclusivity. And I recall that Max Deacon sent us out a little shout out asking for videos that, kind of fell to the back of my inbox. But I would suggest that any of us that, remember getting that message, maybe have a look at it and see about putting together that little video for Max, because we really do need those voices at the table. And they're a part of the accountability too. They'll hold us accountable. So just a thought there. And thanks to Max.
Thanks, Tony. And Megan, we don't have to use the whole, we don't have to go to 11:30 if we end sooner. That's totally fine.
Yeah, well, I guess, Rick, that's a great question there, is how are we going to get the youth voices involved in building this policy?
Let's say, Rick, Michael, Ted here. I'm just got a quick follow-up thought to that, and maybe to partially answer your question, Michael. Back on Earth Day, Creatively United for the Planet, which is located in the Capital Regional District here, brought in eight youth from Calgary to Up Island to talk about their movement, to talk about their aspirations, and they were also wonderfully articulate. So that would almost be a little bit of a bottom up into the broader Canada-wide approach that is Climate Caucus, and the top down might be Katie, obviously, from 350.org and the 200 or so groups across the country. She probably has lots of connections to presumably youth right from coast to coast to coast that might be able to get engaged to answer your question, Michael.
Yeah, and I want to build on that is that we actually got funding from McConnell Foundation to work with Youth Climate Lab to develop a system of mentoring young people on how to infiltrate their local governments. So it's almost like a manual for young people on how to, make a presentation at a committee of the whole meeting, how to get on to join a committee, like what kind of committees are out there, how to lobby effectively your local councillor or mayor, and even how to run for council, how to run for local government. So this will be
how to change government structures so they don't have a lot of impediments to that.
Sure.
Because, the government structures we have at the local level are very anti-democratic. I mean, I'm sorry, like these reports come out in the City of Toronto a week before they're discussed. It's very little time for people to look at it. The format is very inaccessible. If we really look at the opportunities for people to participate in local government, I think that's the other side of the coin here. Like we do want engagement. We do want to enable our communities to give us their full force, right? To all the, listen, cities are going to be tapped out from now until further notice. And we better start figuring out how to animate the resources in our communities, and probably starting with considering changing some of the structures that we use so we can invite them in. Because right now you can train and mentor them, but it's really hard for youth to come, and it's in the middle of the day, and it's at the pleasure of council's frameworks, and it's in an intimidating framework, and so forth and so on. You all know what I mean, I think, by that. So there's another area of thought here about how we change the very systems that we use to make decisions, because they're not very inviting to our communities, and we really need our communities, especially in the coming years.
And I think, Mary, that system change, which so many of the youth are holding up, the system change, not climate change, at the climate events. And so I think that is being involved in changing that system. We are the level of government that's close. They're your neighbors, they're your community, right? So we're the level of government, and it's the same people. I always say, it's like people always talk about like provincial and federal politics as if it's different constituencies. And I'm like, they're the same people, right? But I think engaging, like changing the way local government works, decolonizing local government, every level of government, there's so much that we can do that will lead to the changes that we want, but it is that systems approach. I didn't think we had to go till it was 11:30 or anything. I just didn't want anyone to not get a chance to speak.
Megan, can I hop in and say something there though too?
Yes, please.
It's that I completely agree with what you're saying, Mary, that I think we are so unwelcoming while being like, come on in and tell us what you think. And it's not true. It's disingenuous. But I also think we have to say which youth are we talking about? Because in my community, what I'm seeing, there are youth that come to me, but they're predominantly upper middle class, white, able-bodied youth. So we have to talk about Indigenous youth. So when I've engaged with like racialized and Indigenous youth, they've often told me like, you're part of an illegitimate government on stolen lands. And we have to be willing to hear that from those youth. But we also have to talk again about, we use inclusivity, it's become a value signal. We have to be able to name those groups who are underrepresented. Like, how do we get kids from working class families involved in their perspectives? Like, we have to break down these demographics and not just say youth as a broad brush, because it's not just youth, because we'll just replicate these systems of people who are already in positions of power by having, again, these middle class youth who are going to have opportunities to be volunteers, to go to post-secondary education. And there's youth who are working, a couple jobs to support their families, and they're not, or doing caregiving because their parents are working 3 jobs. Yeah, I think we have to dig into that a little bit more than just saying sort of youth and saying that youth is good enough. They're not a monolith.
Thank you, Nadine. That is so true and so important. Thanks for sharing that. Tracy?
I just have some thoughts on youth as well, because My Sea to Sky has been engaging a lot with the youth in our region. They're getting burned out, and we are essentially asking them to stand up because we have failed to lead. We have failed to act, and we have failed to do the work that we've needed to do for the last 4 decades. And now we are asking the youth to stand up and hold us all accountable and fix this problem for us. And they're burning out. We had youth organize climate strikes last year. Sorry, and I'm going to get teary about this. We had youth organize climate strikes. And then our local government wanted them to do it again because they needed that repeated message over and over. And when we asked the youth if they could do that, they told us very clearly, it's just like, we don't have the capacity to take this on right now. We are in our final year of school. Some of them are in middle school. We're stealing their childhoods. So what we need to do is actually listen to the message that they've given us and start to lead.
And if I could just, Tracy, thanks for that. I think that that's the message that also Seth was trying to get across, is that this is a moment for local leaders to step forward with, you know, if it's the Green New Deal, the Just Recovery, this is where the intergenerational connections can happen, where local leaders in positions of influence can take that agenda and that message forward. So, you know, I think that would be a very powerful COVID bounce forward or bounce back better, or however you want to move this forward into changing the system. You'll get more out of the climate action work in the long run as well. So I really applaud that. I think that would be a very empowering place to land.
And Ted here, and sorry, yeah, just underscoring what Tracy was saying. Yeah, those youth that all have their own youth organizations that I mentioned on Earth Day. They also mentioned all of them that they're getting burnt out, but that they're also getting quite abused, as you can imagine, with different social media and the responses from some of the lay public out there. So certainly we need to support them, and we need to do it from all levels and from the top. As you say, Jenny, and Green New Deal, by the way, sorry, was it Seth? Certainly other reasons to support it is it's becoming internationally acceptable, from the European Green Deal. China's applying it apparently. South Korea's just committed to doing it with their latest government that just came in. But I guess the other related comment I'd make is it has to be, the coalition needs to be bipartisan, as was mentioned, but also signed on to and engaged with a range of credible organizations. So, you know, where's the Suzuki Foundation? Where's the Wilderness Society? Where's all these different groups? The more when something is formed is seen to be done by bipartisan and a range of credible organizations, public and private, the more other people will feel comfortable to sign on.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I really appreciate what the perspectives that everyone's shared, and will certainly inform, as the communications group of Climate Caucus, what next steps we take moving forward. So this has been so great. I really appreciate everyone sharing, taking the time out of their busy or strangely not busy, depending on where you are in this crisis, but a lot to reflect on for me personally. And Rick or Will, do either of you have any closing thoughts? And then we'll figure out what's next.
I think Rick spoke well a few minutes ago about sort of what will be happening over the next few days at Together Ensemble, and I put the link to register in the chat. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to register, please go ahead, and we'll see you in the coming days.
I'm good, Megan, but thanks everybody. It's this has been really helpful for me too, and I think Will, Megan, and I will sort of debrief, and Judy and the rest of the team and Alex will debrief afterwards and pull some of the notes together. We'll cut the video. It'll be available on YouTube as well later, so we'll share all that out with you, and hope to see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone. You're
Thank
inspiring.
You. Bye.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jenny.
Rick, are you lingering for a minute? Hi, Ben.
Linger.
Bye, Ben.
I'm just gonna stop our recording on YouTube. How do I do that? Stop cloud recording, stop recording. And then I'm not sure how to stop YouTube. Maybe we should hang up this meeting and rejoin.
Hi, Don.
Hey, Don. Okay, so we're gonna close this meeting and just reconnect.
Okay.